Another giant of the Danish authors and philosophers, Niels Severin Grundtvig, Niels Fredrik Severin Grundtvig, from the century before ours, had left a lasting impact up until our days and has spread his thoughts all over the world, not by himself, but by the inspiration that were in them. He was really one of the big fathers of Denmark. So if you want to understand Denmark, understand Scandinavia, you have also to look at his life and works and ideas. And he has left his mark on many issues. I will start with that, his effect in the world and in Denmark and Scandinavia, with the ideas of the folk high schools and the school for life. But also in many other ways, he was really an all-round man. That will give you a sense of who he is in some words, like his the romantic, mythologic, priest, historian, public speaker, and the enlightener of the public, poem writer, songwriter, politician, and he had also some ideas about the identity, who he was as a Dane, but also digging back into the mythology that really formed that country and idea and the soul of it. And that's what also left a lasting impact. And he was also behind and with all that, a global human who also went to England several times to also catch up with some inspirational ideas and combine it with his faith. And this is a very special issue that we are really in need of getting inspiration to. How do you combine an old kind of faith with new times and times that's maybe going in different directions, taking people in all kind of delusions or ideas that's maybe not really giving them any kind of satisfaction. And so that's what we're going to look into. But maybe the right thing is to say that my inspiration about Grundtvig is from this book of Anders Holm, a Danish theologian and author. And he wrote a very fine introduction that you can see in front of you there. It's been translated into several languages now, and I contacted them for translating it into Arabic back in 2019 and got finished in 3.5 months, but still the book is underway being published. And this beautiful introduction by Anders Holm is very good because it takes you a bit beneath the surface, but does not take you in the jungle of his thoughts and words, because he's left really many speeches, words, and works. He wrote a book in history and on history, a lot of psalms and talks, a lot of theology, and a lot of mythological history. He looked into the culture and nature. He was a romantic from the time of the Romanticism, and he lived also a turbulent life in some part of it, trying to find himself in those waves of disbelief and distrust in the faith that Denmark was building. Of course, he is marked by this faith, the Lutheran Christian way of looking at life, but he's also a global mind. And that's also interesting for people around the world to understand that how do you look at your faith in the light of the times you are in, and try to find the strength in it and the combination of it with the modern world, and maybe change some of what you have been looking at to be of benefit for the world around you. And so he is very beneficial in many ways. And that's what this biography really is good for, giving a sense of idea of his informational mind and how he had really inspired around the world. So let's start there. Let's start with his inspiration around the world and how he came to become that inspiration. We know that it is one of the cornerstones on which Denmark is built and stays up. This is a quote from Georg Brandes, a very famous Jewish Danish philosopher, author, and writer that had really big impact on Danish culture and literature in the modern times. He wasn't Christian in his thoughts and beliefs. He was more that existential humanist, maybe closer to some kind of political realist, but he could appreciate Grundtvig in many ways. We have also Barack Obama, the President of the United States, in 2016, May 13th, speaking to the Nordic ministers of state, telling them that many of our Nordic friends knows the big Danish priest and philosopher Grundtvig. He was, among a lot other things, a speaker for the idea of the folk high schools, an education that was not only for the elite, but for the many. We wouldn't have been here if it hasn't been for that stone that was thrown in the lake and made these waves of hope that at last spread over the seas to the United States. And so we can see, even in our time, the awareness of his life and his effect is there, even though many people cannot have access to his writings and read them because it's complicated and it's difficult, and it's trying to pursue a lot of issues, especially the theological ones, and solve some trouble in understanding the Christian faith and dogmas and the way of looking at texts and seeing their value. But he was also looking into history and wrote a book about world history that never really finished or was not really all round, but it gave a sense of what he was trying. And he wanted to be remembered as an historian. Also, he did a lot of work to try and make the life of the ordinary people educated and enlightened. He needed that common man and woman to understand what they are holding of values. And so he wanted to transform this into some kind of public education that took the spiritual and religious side with it. He was really keen on delivering the message of God through Christ to the people, but not as that preacher who will jump on the chair or try to gather people in big masses, but through education and the relation of the work and the life with that spiritual historic side that people really liked and was keen on. And that's the balance he in some ways was trying to create through his work in life. And let's start there backwards to see how his effect on the world has been, because that will give us a sense of who he was and how it was like so important also to keep looking back at these historical figures and take some notion of what they have been giving us up until now. There has been a kind of statistic showing all the schools that has been in a way built on the idea of the folk high school of Grundtvig, the living word, and the school for life, and not the school for a certain education and filling the heads with a lot of information that pupils will go and puke up afterwards. These are close to the words of Grundtvig himself in some of his writings. And many schools wanted to combine that outside in the world. Some schools have just taken the idea, and others were built very close to the way that he did Marielus Skole in North Sjælland in Copenhagen. And so it differs a lot, but up to 700 high schools on world plan was meant to be these public high schools that combine a kind of practical education with some historical and spiritual awareness and a kind of community that people could relate to and empower them in life in different levels. And so the author, Anders Holm, of this book has been mentioning that, many of these ideas were spread out of the International People's College in Helsingør by a guy called Peter Manicka, who was inspired by this idea and then spread it out, and many people came to study there or have a stay there. So it's more like people come from another places or students and get in contact with that very special atmosphere and environment of enlightening your mind through discussions and talks and listening to the living word and talking about it, getting this historical and spiritual awareness, awareness of the connection between nature and culture, people and politics. Many issues start developing from there. And so the author will tell us that many high schools, I will quote him here, Anders Holm, many high schools in other countries has been founded by a charismatic soul who has heard about Grundtvig and the high schools, and then had his period in Denmark, for instance, on the International High School in Helsingør, thereafter going home and started a school in his or her local area. And so these are the initiatives that started spreading these different high schools, and they formed in different ways. So they are not just a system that is very much alike each other. And so it made it more available for the people around the world to take the basic idea and turn it into something local, and something that could be in many ways used as a way of education and understanding. And we have this Northfields High School that has been visited especially by Japanese who came there to take some combined courses in sports, handcraft, and healthcare, combined with humanistic ideas and lessons in humaniora, as they would say in the university language, humanistic topics on politics, society, education, development, and so on. And that has spread a lot and became very popular in Japan, and had an impact on their way of thinking, as well as this leader Tadao Shiba has been writing in his book that was well known from 2010, The Most Happy Country, Danish life conditions, that had sold a lot of books. You also find this idea in many places around the world, like Nigeria, Ghana, Nepal, English, Bangladesh, the Philippines, and in Egypt. And you will see that he has also had a lot of direct or indirect impact in these places, in Japan, South Korea, China, USA, Canada, Ungarn, and Hungary, Poland, the Baltic countries. He had a kind of inspiration to empower the people who have been politically suppressed or put out of the picture, not as a political counter movement that's going for a revolution. This is not his way at all, but as a kind of empowering and educating, enlightening the people who are there in that community. And so we see that it's actually been different ways of developing the high school idea based on that idea from Grundtvig, and he's mentioned there, and many places he would be the source for that understanding. Let's focus on the United States, which is such an important place to focus on because of its power and place in history, especially in our times. His ideas came with the Danish settlers who came to USA in the 1870s and established themselves there. And they were kind of under the umbrella of the Danish Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and Grundtvig Union for Danish Folk Society in 1887. They gathered a lot of Danes under these organizations there and established a lot of colonies in Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, Montana, North Dakota, Texas, California, and several others in Canada. And so in these Danish refugee environments, still today, there is this very clear inspiration from the Grundtvig's ideas. And you can see that still they keep holding these meetings, folk meetings, a 5 days summer meeting with lectures and history telling, music, folk dance, and different other ideas that combine people in the folk school in Minnesota, as the author would tell us here. And from there, with time, these ideas got spread to the American folk schools. And there are maybe today around 70 schools not connected to the Danish migrants, but established on the idea of that way of educating. And so they are also registered under the Folk Education Association of America, and these are, just to mention some kind of high school seeking the original values and the values of practical work, like handwork and cooking and experiencing nature, and combining it with lectures and talks and historical awareness and personal awareness as well. The issue is that the word high school or folk high school in American is the Danish highskole, højskole, and so it's not easy to translate it directly. And this is a topic that every translator who's worked with these books has had, because how do you translate folk high school so it doesn't look like a high school as the gymnasium? Because in different words, in different places of the world, the ideas can be related to other kind of education systems like the high school, the gymnasium. And so the folk school is more like showing that this is for the people and people who maybe didn't have an education, and then that it's not really what can you say, formalized. So it's not that kind of education where you go and stay for many years. It's a place where you tap in for shorter or longer periods and get a lot of intense understanding of your life, your situation. You get a handcraft, you learn something using your hands, your head, the communication, the debates, the quiet sitting in the evenings, the singing, the talks, the psalms, and the spiritual inspiration as well. And you get it all together as a human being, because for Grundtvig, when he developed in his life, he got to the notion saying that, well, you have to be human first, and the human must become the first issue that you relate to and understand before looking into the faith of the human and having that faith follow. And I know it sounds a little bit romanticized, because he had also this very strong views on other religions and cultures that also shows in his diaries, and the distancing himself from the Turks and the Jews and some other parts in the beginning. But he had these reviews later, and so he comes to this idea of the folk high school that is basically the basic need of building up the spirit. Of course, in his mind, this the Christian spirit that he is carrying with him, but it became more and more just an inspirational idea that could fit in other cultures as well. So you see it in the Hinduistic and Buddhistic countries. You see it partly in the Muslim countries, and also in part of the world where people are not really just relating to his theology, but just taking it as an inspirational idea and developing it from there. One of the very clear places that did that is the John C. Campbell Folk School that was established in 1919 to 1925. It's a couple who saw that they needed to help people in their area of North Carolina to a better education, and to help the people in the Appalachian Mountains, Smoky Mountains, to get hold of their life in a better way. And they took that idea of the Danish high school and built that high school after the Danish model. And so this lady, Olive Campbell, started with her friend Marguerite Butler to study the folk high schools in Denmark, and went there as well before they started. And then when they built their high schools, they could focus on handwork, design, art, and different other ways of practicing practical achievements. How do you build something? How do you work with handcraft? How do you use art? How can you make food? And so at the same time, they had this inspiration for the mind and the heart, the living word, and the idea of focusing on both the handcraft and what you get into your soul of inspiration, the words of the beautiful song that is moving, the history lesson that will show us a special period or shed light on our society. And so they tried to combine this. John C. Campbell School, it was called after her husband, who died before they could realize that dream. But the dream did become really a reality, and became part of what pushed the stone further from that place to Tennessee, the Highlander Folk High School, that really inspired a lot of those who made the movement towards a more just and understanding society that will come later with Miles Horton and the people around that school, where he inspired also Martin Luther King Jr. And that's why Barack Obama has this awareness of the folk high schools, because he could see through the Highlander back to the John C. Campbell School, and then back to the Grundtvig's idea in Denmark. And so he could see the relation to that Scandinavian education system and way of thinking as part of that evolvement that had been happening in the United States in the minds and ideas of simple people from working class with not much education on their backs and not so much self-trust in what they can do in life. So that kind of empowerment became not only empowerment of the hands and the work, but also the minds. You get stronger awareness about society and your role in it and structures and how they function. And at the same time, you get awareness of the soul, your spirit, and you get enlightened, so you could feel that great love and safety and longing for the eternal life that your spirit always will be longing to. And of course, all that is through the Christian literature of psalms and songs and Bible stories and other kind of parables and adventure stories. But that can also be translated in other cultures. So if you take this idea of the high school and perform it in a Muslim country, you would be able to relate that kind of empowerment of people who are suppressed or have trouble finding their way through life with their own culture. And the same in Japan and in India and other places. And it's like people could sense that Grundtvig, despite his very strong Christian views and theology, at the same time had developed this global way of inspiring people. And that's what's so strange. It's like kind of something mystical going on here. I've heard that also from different sources, that it's not really clear how this inspiration came to be so widespread out there in the world. But it's like, as Miles Horton could say, well, I saw in his life a rebel with prophetic insights, an inspirator, a speaker for the poor, and for those who didn't have a voice. And so all that by just understanding part of Grundtvig's life, because he went to Copenhagen in 1931 and visited Borup's high school, folk high school, and got this inspiration from how Grundtvig lived his life and developed, and what was the things he really engaged himself in. And that later had an effect on the movement, the Black civil rights movement, from that Highlander school with Miles Horton, who could see that it's about empowering these people who has this certain look of themselves as lower and less important than the white persons, and help them understand that passive demonstration, protest way that already had inspired people in India with Gandhi. And Gandhi was inspired also from other sources before that to go on with his work. And so we get to Rosa Parks, where she, the famous lady who became the symbol of that citizen right movement, when she in 1955 was arrested because she didn't want to move from her position in a bus for with seats for white passengers. And she sat and she said, "It's my right to sit wherever it is in this bus." And she stayed there. And she didn't fight back, just became a symbol of what is so absurd, that black people and white people could not sit beside each other, and there were seats reserved for those who were black and those who were white. And we're speaking 1955, 1960s, in that country that had the Enlightenment and the goddess of freedom in it. And so these ideas that sipped in by the ideas of Grundtvig and the high schools in Denmark, that will empower simple people who did not have access to the elites and didn't have a voice and didn't really understand life or live it. They got something to do, both with their hands, their mind, historical awareness, and their personality development, all in very different shape. And some of the persons who also went to this school or had contact with it was Martin Luther King himself. And so later they were accused of being like training communists and people who are against the white people and the white society. And of course, this is not what's interesting us right now. It's more that how far these ideas actually had spread, and they relate to them. And Miles Horton said that I get this inspiration from Grundtvig's ideas and way of thinking. If we turn to India, we will find some of the same ideas in Indra. In India, there is this lady and missionary called Anne-Marie Peterson who died in 1951. She was a teacher and had was raised in the environment of the Grundtvig's milieu in Denmark, and she had this understanding with her when she went to India and get in contact with Mahatma Gandhi, who was in her time. He died in 1948, and she had a good friendship with him. And many would say that Gandhi's ideas for that passive revolution and empowering the people also came from that contact. In 1920, she started a small school for a housing school for girls who were poor in Siva Mandir. And well, they came to a place south of Madras, what's called Chennai. And the school was inspired directly by the pedagogical ideas that Gandhi had and also Grundtvig. And they became the founding stones for the school. And so later she developed these ideas, and India became aware of this very special vision of these people that Grundtvig had been talking about, and became more aware that it is like coloring the culture you are in with this original human idea. There must be a human culture before you can have a religious culture. And Grundtvig spoke about having a Christian culture and cultivating people into Christianity. The basis for that is they become human first. And so you look at the human and the human needs, and you take care of the human person, developing this person before you go and tap into their life with religion and ideas like that. And so that inspired people in India very much. And in the south state of Kerala and South India, you find school societies called Mitrinikatan. And one of the biggest initiatives in India, it means the meeting place for friends. I'm sure I'm not saying it correct, the Mitra Niketan. But it's the idea of people meeting and getting connected in institutions and have everything around them that they need. And if you go to that school, you will find the picture of both Gandhi and Grundtvig hanging there. So he is already deep into India in many places, and combining this idea of the folk high schools, and later inspiring different people like Sri Viswanathan and other people who really did a difference for their communities and societies. And this Sri Viswanathan, this environment fighter and engineer who died in 2014, said that he was in the mid-50s when he went to the United States and visited John C. Campbell School and the Highlander. Was very fascinated by the way they did their school life and engagement in society, and how he could just feel and sense that kind of development that happened there. And so he wrote later that in Denmark, I saw how the country has become a big nation in economical and social considerations because of N.F.S Grundtvig's influence. He had the ability to awaken the Danish awareness. He made the country show its cultural inheritance in the folklore, and he revived the traditions of the folk and developed the schools, even though he didn't live to see the result of it. But people who saw that later understood, like when you discover that common ground that they were standing in. So these are words from Sri Viswanathan about an important figure in Indian culture, died in 2014. Yeah, so as we can see, he is in two big, huge cultures and countries outside in the world. but he also came to Nigeria, especially, and Africa, also through Danish work and, of course, missionaries or people with influenced by the idea of folk high schools. So he has also been there. We have also in Bangladesh, in Comilla, in the eastern Bangladesh, also a little society that started by Mrs. Mabood Fatima Kabir, that got inspired by this way of empowering women to read and write and go away their business, all within the limits of their own cultures. And so the effect of Grundtvig indirectly also by the NIDA work, the Danish International Aid and Development Agency, and other works, was all like to spread the empowerment of the people around the world and make them understand their conditions in the light of history, who is the human being, empowering people to have a handwork, to learn it, and to be in a community and stay together. And you can imagine that inspiration that arises from being together in a place where you both work, had some lectures, listen, work together, sit together, have talks, sing, or hymns if you are from a culture where you do not sing a lot, whatever it is that binds you, will become the empowerment of your soul. And that's the key to getting empowered in life. That is to become aware of who you are, what you are from, what kind of culture you're living in, how it could be that things are as they are. And so, just to say that this is actually just a picking from that book about how Grundtvig got inspired in the world. And if we look at Grundtvig's inspiring in Denmark, maybe I could put it short because most Danes, they know this, and people out in the world won't be so interested in the details of how he's inspiring in Denmark. But it's important to understand that the movement, the Grundtvigian movement after Grundtvig, was actually split in 2 or 3 type of ways of thinking of him. And these are called like the old Grundtvig supporters, the new Grundtvig supporters, and the free Grundtvig supporters, or the middle part between these two. And they had their differences. What's regarding to the church, the school, the culture, the politics, it's like they are emphasizing different ways. So in Denmark, it's like some have emphasized the mission work and Christian theology and the songs and psalms and the revival of the spirit of the faith that Grundtvig came with and put into words, into the beautiful Danish language, and made it very beautiful to read and write. And I will give examples from these songs and psalms later. But it's like reviving that connection between the human and the culture, and the human and the God, the human and love, and all by using nature and words about nature and life and daily life, and then express some issues around that related to the eternal life, or the peace that is to find in God's words or in the love of the Savior, and so on. So one group of these Grundtvigian people emphasized his Christian inheritance and his background as a priest and theologian above anything else, and said, well, this is the mission that we have to continue his work in spreading the church as the place where the holy living word could spread and become empowered. Because there is a debate and discussion about the Bible critic at that time that he was living, that we could not rely on it anymore. So what is there to rely on? And we will get back to that, but he's saying that basically he found a very unique discovery on the way of looking at the old stories and histories in the Bible, whether you believe in them or not. The spirit of Christ and the spirit of Christianity is going on in the living movement. The people who are gathering together, keeping the living word alive, going together to the communion and sharing their faith in the Psalms and in the prayers and in going to the altar, receiving the blood and bread in Christ's name, or as they say, um, Christ's body and blood. And so it's in that they say that the Christian is alive. And this is what he saw as the renewal of the Christian idea in a time where people quickly has been and will be losing faith at his time. I'll get back to that in another talk. But well, this is one part. The other part was like the new kind of Grundtvig followers who, well, they wanted more to use his ideas in politics and to influence society in politics, because this is where they saw that he could make a great inspiration. And at the same time also with that kind of schools called free schools that could help people and children become curious and have the ability to learn and organize in ways they couldn't before. And so it's like to be open to the modern culture and not really being closed and rejecting of it, and to try to take your faith and your spirituality into that modern culture and not fighting it. And that was also part of his inspiration, that he was able in his own life to make this movement. This is what we're going to see from this biography. He made this movement of going from being that closed-minded, very conservative priest into understanding the world around him and where it was moving, and going all the way back to history to bring the identity into the realm of the now, and making the people aware of who they are and what inheritance they're carrying and why it's important to carry it with them and keep going with it. And so he spread that spirit among people to take your history and your spirit with you in the modern times. Engage yourself in it. Do not shut yourself out of it. And so this is a kind of tradition that also flourished at that time and later in Denmark, and had a big influence on free schools and free high schools and people's schools that maybe saw his ideas more of empowering the people to relate to the modern times they were in, instead of just closing themselves up in the religious ideas without any kind of involvement in the ideas that was in the time. And so it became political movements, and several movements in Denmark, also political ideas, has been based on some of his work and his words. And we have a lot of quotes from politicians and people who are trying to relate to Grundtvig. Here is one from several politicians in Denmark. Well, the respect for faith and the awareness of the difference of faith is a thing that is a common sense, a natural thing in countries in Grundtvig's fatherland. So they are combining his ideas with, well, it's very natural to have differences in faith and have this inclusion and understanding, because he fought for that later in his life. Grundtvig, he went on trying to preach another kind of understanding for people with another faith, even within the Christian church. They shouldn't be excluded, the Baptists and people who had a different way of looking at that Christian praxis, because he lived also in isolation for so long, and that developed him also a lot. But that was also later taken to be the concern for people who had another faith altogether and came from total other traditions. Another politician had seen more his Danish identity and Christianity, and he says, well, it's not his thoughts one by one that makes him big, but his passion and his open-minded, strong talk that is forbidden by the political correctness we're living in today. This is very inspiring, says another politician. And a third one will say, well, the language is so important, it's so beautiful. The word is creating. And she says that, well, the language can be used to identify a group as different and give it guilt and make it like in a way stigmatized. But the legitimacy of these other people are also used by the language to be given protection and rights. Another one would say, instead of saying what Grundtvig would have said in this and that and trying to interpret him into one or another thing, we should instead try to use his thoughts more actively in different situations. And so if Grundtvig meant that we had the freedom to say everything also from the chair of the preaching and church, well, we have also to have this possibility, like in real life, in other ways. And so he's very mentioned and used in many different ways. And everyone wants to relate to him in Denmark, among politicians as well, and try to say, well, I'm having this from Grundtvig, or Grundtvig had this idea. So everybody is in a way also understanding that he is a father figure, and he is also understood. Even people with some Marxist ideas had a try to combine his words with some of those of Marx, because Grundtvig has also this idea of the rich, the people with the wealth, should not have too much, when the others with no wealth had too little. So he wanted to have this nation that took care of the poorest in a political, social way, not only in talks, and not only in preachers, and not only relating them to God's heaven and wait for the paradise to come, where God will give you the eternal life. No, it's here and now, the practical side of Christian living. And so he was also a kind of community thinker, a spokesperson for grassroots movements and for this ideal of having the poor taken care of, like the rich should not go and run away with their wealth, away from their, what can you say, responsibility. Others, they took from him the idea of discussing theology and digging into deep in how to understand the basic dogmas of religion and the belief. And this is in every religion around the world. For everyone who knows a little bit, well, there will arise discussions about how to understand this or that. How can we relate on this or that belief or idea in the belief? And it goes all the way around. And he had these discussions, and he went also battling these ideas in him and around him. And people are still up to now, and people who are like experts in these issues, or maybe related to it, try to use him or use his words and phrases, or maybe try to understand what he was saying and relate it to the people. And so we see there are different inspiration, different movements, a political one, a missionary one, a religious theological discussion, one that will the inclusion of people, upbuilding of culture, identity, the specialness of being a Dane was also part of what he had been thinking, that God has given these Nordic areas a very special relation and history that they should be understanding, and they should be knowing that they are part of. Yeah, so let's go through the book and see how all this will get back to be understood in a way or another, because it is really a beautiful story. And as I said, this book of Anders Holm is worth reading. It's in English, translated by a very fine Englishman, and it's in different other language around the world. And I translated it into Arabic, still hoping it will be published. I don't know. A long story on that too. Felt a little bit awkward, waiting a lot for the correction of the translation, and waiting for these persons involved to get back to it. So, but it will come out when it's meant for it to come out, if it comes out. Anyhow, I got inspired by reading this book, and I wanted to translate it to my language, and I also got inspired understanding and a lot of sides about Denmark and the Danes and the way of thinking in Denmark, but also how this could be used in the world, in my own world, in the Arabic world, and in many places, to empower people and to change the sets of minds, and that every human being can have this access to this realm of deeper spiritual and handwork, ideas for the mind, communion, community, sorry, and the way of sharing the responsibility for the social and political life in an organized way that is enlightened, not just these demonstrations that go out and burn flags and burn shops along the way, but in a way it has a purpose that is very clear and is connected to enlightenment and upbuilding and freedom, responsibility, not just this kind of rebellious movement who wants to topple every government. He was against that actually in his thoughts, and he wanted people to adhere both to the king and to the laws, and to respect that and live within the limits of what is possible, but also be enlightened enough to change your life and take hand on your own life and take your faith with you. This was one of the big bridges that also meant a lot to me, that Grundtvig managed to show me how he tried to struggle with this faith who is losing contact with reality, is brought in to the 19th century. In the late 1800s, really a big issues were arising with big doubts and spreading movements that wanted to get rid of the old clothes, as they say, seeing them as negative and not trusting the holy book and not wanting neither Christianity or any other religious value to have that impact on morals. And it's that total, like, let's shake off all the shackles. And I understand that because by reading history we can see that, well, it hasn't been a rosenbed of beauty all the time. People have been suppressed and misused, and an elite has been using both religion and God to a lot of issues. And well, he was part of that elite, and he struggled with that too, between philosophy and his own mind and the Christian faith. And he struggled also with different interpretations of the Christian belief system. And I can see that from my Muslim background. Also, as an educated religious scholar, I can see that I had the same struggles, and many others have them. Between the movements we have in our own yards of Muslim culture, but also when we look broadly at how people are really losing faith in the religious belief itself and the morals and values behind it, and going after something totally different. And so how are we dealing with this? This is very good to know and understand. And how are people trying to overcome it? The ordinary schools are not educating people in these issues, and many people are felt left alone. No enlightenment sources and no understanding. And even now, when we have this media, people are concerned with very, very shallow things. They are not really looking into deep. And that's why these high schools could help people who can be impoverished. No political backing, no richness. They can change their life in very short time to become people who can use the word and the enlightenment and understand how they can realize themselves in the world. So it also made an impact on me, and I struggled also with understanding his ideas and thoughts. But this book gave me really a lot of inspiration and big openings, because it was taking me just to the right level of reading, without getting into that jungle of all kind of details that's maybe when you are on a level you want to understand and relate to your own life, you don't have time for all that. And that's why I want to go through this book and hope it will be of some use for someone out there.